Hi everyone, I'm Francesco, Ethereum researcher, and yeah, thanks for the introduction to Nico and Martin. Actually, one thing I might have to disappoint you on is that it's not going to be a broader talk than last time. So if you were last time and you thought that it was too in the weeds, then this might also be a bit in the weeds. But I think it worked out well last time in the sense that it turned out that we shipped a lot of the stuff that was in the talk over the last year. And yeah, I mean, Fusaka has been on mainnet for a few months, so maybe in like a year and a half. I don't think this is actually going to apply here, but okay, being very optimistic, maybe some of this will make it on chain at some point in the next year, but maybe a bit later. Anyway, so yeah, I took it talking about the roadmap as a chance to speak about a part of the roadmap that I really care about, which is fast finality and its interaction with some of the other things that they were doing. So yeah, the talk specifically is called fast finality, faster blocks, because well, one part of latency is finality latency. There's another part that is just actually block production latency, and the two things are very related, especially today. And I'm kind of going to talk about this relationship and how to maybe get beyond it, basically. So yeah, so one quick motivating point is like, why do we even care about fast finality at the protocol level? And it's essentially the time that that gives the native guarantees of the protocol, like the time in which the users, rollups, like whoever is actually using Ethereum to settle something, gets like the strongest guarantees of this happening. And if we don't do a good job of providing this, like if like today, finality time is very long. It's on average 16 minutes. People are just gonna not use it. They're gonna resort to like less secure solutions. They're gonna resort to, for example, when it comes to bridging, to something that doesn't actually use Ethereum guarantees and things like that. And then the other thing that I personally care about a lot is that I basically, in the process of trying to improve the finality with Ethereum, we can also improve the consensus protocol as a whole, which we know has a lot of kind of idiosyncrasies, let's put it that way, like just problems that we can really improve and get to like a much cleaner protocol without technical debt and with like optimal security properties. Before like getting a bit deeper, like just a quick recap of what even at a high level it looks like what are we trying to achieve. And just like today, we have this image of basically like a two kinds of chains. We have like a finalized chain, this green thing, which is the thing that we're kind of trying to get to be faster, to be like closer to the tip. And then we have an available chain, the blue thing here, which is basically what produces blocks. And it's actually what most users will experience. Like when you go on Etherscan, when you see that after a few seconds, your transaction is included in a block, you're actually looking at the available chain. Your transaction is not finalized yet, but it's there somewhere. There's a chain that's growing, it's doing things, and it can give you some sense that your transaction has some level of safety. And we kind of care about both of these things. In particular, like we want the protocol to progress even if it cannot finalize, basically. And yeah, more concretely, what it looks like today, we have this protocol called Gasper, that it's basically a fusion of a finality gadget called Casper FFG and a available protocol, let's say, called LND Ghost. And again, this is kind of what produces the chain that you usually look at. And probably a lot of you might have seen like this, how this translates to slots and epochs in Ethereum and on the beacon chain, so on the consensus layer, that we basically have this like very small time units, this 12 seconds number that you probably have kind of interacted with when interacting with Ethereum. These are slots, and it's when block production happens. And then there's epochs, these like much longer units of time of 32 slots, at which at this kind of level finality happens. And yeah, finality happens basically by voting in every slot and accumulating this like weight of validators, essentially. Now, one protocol that has been like proposed in the past to kind of improve on finality has been what I'm going to call like an integrated protocol, and specifically this protocol that's called 3SF, or 3-slot finality, that was basically structured in this way, that where this whole finality pipeline that today is very long, it's 2 epochs, would be basically cut down to just 3 slots. So in every slot, slots would look much like today, except in every slot, every single validator would be voting. So now you would have, let's say, 1 million validators all voting in one slot, or however the number of large the number of validators would be. And yeah, you basically have this kind of pipeline where a block is voted on, it gets confirmed. At this point, you get this sort of a bit not quite as reliable guarantees that this available chain gives you. And then it can be justified and finalized, just like today with Casper FFG. So it can get this like really strong like economic security, like this statements like if you don't slash like a third of the stake of the validator set, the block is impossible to revert. So it really looks very similar to today's protocol, but it basically compresses things into one slot, where like the whole voting of the validator set doesn't happen by accumulation, but it all happens in one slot. And one problem, and so this protocol has a lot of good properties, like we can prove essentially a lot of like nice security properties. The issue is that, one issue is that we basically have this like coupling between the block production and the finality timeline. So we have, these two things that are happening. We're producing blocks, we're voting on them, and we're also trying to finalize them at the same time. And this coupling here is quite obvious, like all the validators have to vote at every slot. So you have this very large validator set, you cannot even produce the next block until all the validators have voted. So this is quite like a big bottleneck essentially. And it kind of goes both ways. On the one end, finality slows down block production because you, again, have to have this very large voting round in the critical path of producing the next block. And on the other end, like block production also slows down finality because basically you have to do a bunch of things for block production that really have nothing to do with finality, and you kind of put them in the pipeline of finality. And yeah, so the first side, again, it's quite simple. It's just, you have now this big blob of validators. Like imagine this big thing is just a lot of validators. So it takes a while to do this voting round. And it could look like this. It could look like you have a much smaller set of a much smaller committee or something like that. And this is how you progress slot to slot. And going from the right to the left, you have to just increase the slot time a lot. And on the other side, it kind of looks like this. Like you could have this nice picture from below where like you produce a block and then you kind of immediately just finalize it by doing this like very large voting rounds, justification, finalization, like in Casper FFG. But then what it actually looks like in 3SF is this picture from above, where everything happens kind of interleaved. And so you have a lot more, you need more things basically to happen before you can actually finalize something. And this actually is just the same. Now this is more obvious maybe with 3SF because you have this like big validator set that's voting in every slot. So it's kind of obvious how it's slowing things down. But it's actually the same in today's protocol. Like you might think, okay, today's protocol, there's these two timelines that are actually pretty separate. There is like the slot timeline and the epoch timeline. They look like two different timelines that have sort of nothing to do with each other. In reality, it's not really like this. It's because we have this coupling that comes from, we basically say we have, in each slot, we have one fixed fraction of the validator set that's voting. It's 1/32. So we have like 32 slots per epoch. And this basically means that if we wanted to make finality faster, we would want to compress this. We would want this to not be 32, but to be 16, to be 8, or something like that, even all the way down to 1. So we want to basically make epochs smaller, but then we go towards having larger committees and this being a problem for block production. And on the other side, the opposite problem essentially, that we could go in the other direction, but then we make finality very bad to make block production faster. So today, basically, we have the same trade-off. And yeah, we just have this like kind of compromise that's not great, but it's just fine, where we have 12-second slots, it's not awful, and we have finality being basically 12 minutes or 16 on average, which is also, well, it's pretty bad, but it could be worse. And yeah, it's just one point in the trade-off space. But you could go in a different direction, but you're gonna make one of the two things worse, essentially. And this 3SF protocol that we kind of had introduced and studied a while ago, it basically doesn't really go beyond this trade-off in any way. It just says, well, let's hope that the validator set is small enough that this is all kind of fine. Like we just say, well, in every slot we can have everyone vote. Maybe now we don't have 1 million validators anymore. Maybe we could get down to like 10,000 or something. Like we could consolidate the validator set. There's this like effort ongoing to get people to consolidate their validators. But yeah, like that's basically just hoping that the trade-off is going to disappear by consolidating the validator set. And there's like another path, which I'm going to call roughly decoupled protocols, which is actually trying to get these two timelines to be separate from each other and not interacting with each other in such a way that this trade-off actually disappears. And so as many things, Vitalik had kind of mentioned this in some blog post. He had this proposal to basically say, well, let's and hopefully you cannot recognize the words, like LMD Ghost with 256 validator. This is this like available chain thing that kind of produces blocks and so on at the tip of the chain. And he was saying, let's run this with like a very small committee. Could be 256, it could be more, but whatever, a small committee that basically would just like try to keep the chain going in a fast manner. And then fast follow in finality gadget. So try to have then, after you produce blocks with this thing, you have a finality gadget that separately then tries to finalize them, which you could say it looks a lot like today, but it does this like important step of actually decoupling the two timelines. So not trying to do finality by having 256 validator vote first, and then 256 more, and then 256 more. Like this committee part will not be how you eventually get finality. Like finality is not by accumulation of small committees, essentially. And why? I mean, this is kind of just summarizing what I've said so far, but like, why do we want this decouple type of protocol? One reason is just latency, both of slots like block production, and the other one is finality, like latency of finality, that we just eliminate this trade-off. And then the other one is that we basically stop having this really hard dependency on validator set consolidation for making this kind of improvements to finality. So we basically don't want to be in a position where we have to say, oh, we have to get the validator set from 1 million to 10,000. Like that's a very big step in order to be able to ship something that looks like fast finality. Like it would be nice if we could just do it regardless of where we're at with the consolidation process. And what this looks like at a high level is again this, like we have this timeline of block production on top, this like again blue available chain, which has these like orange kind of small committees now. So it's, today this committee blob would look like 30,000 validators. Now this maybe could look like 500 or like 1,000. So it could be like much smaller and much faster to actually, you wouldn't need to actually aggregate these votes. It could be like a much faster process. So these lots could be potentially quite a bit smaller, so it kind of helps in that part of things to optimize for shorter slots if that's what we want to do. And then independently, you have this kind of big green things that are doing finality, and here it's maybe like the whole validator set that's voting all at once, but it's kind of doing so on its own time. I mean, here you see that it roughly matches the slot time, but that's just for the picture to I don't know, not stretch it out too long and make the picture weird. But this could be completely independent. It could take 4 slots, it could take 4.5, it doesn't really matter. It's just happening, and when it's done, it's done. And so these two things can be then independently kind of optimized. And otherwise things look still like this. Like you have this confirmation step and then the finality step, like justifying and then finalizing. So 2 like big voting rounds and 1 small voting round, basically. And I mean, one question would be, why didn't, it seems like pretty like simple idea. Why didn't we just do this a while ago? And one reason is that there really wasn't a viable design for this until quite recently. Basically, it boils down to this blue chain, this like available chain thing that kind of happens at the tip and like produces blocks. We just didn't really have a good enough design for it that supports committees. Like we kind of want it to move fast, so we want it to not be the whole validator set that's voting in every slot. We want it to be like some rotating committees. And it turns out that like the kind of protocols that work like that, they all add some kind of problems that we didn't really like. Roughly speaking, they basically, once you have a bit of network asynchrony, they tend to have the same kind of problem. And I'm going to try to describe like what this problem is, more or less, with an example. And so there's like one protocol that we worked on specifically, but actually it's kind of representative of a bunch of these protocols that look like this. Like they all kind of tend to have the same problem, essentially. It's quite similar to LMD Ghost, but it has this property that it's memoryless. So again, in LMD Ghost, you have blocks and then you have votes. And votes are what lets you figure out where do you go in the fourth choice, like what actually is the chain that you're following. And this memorylessness means that basically at slot T, you only care about the votes from the previous slot. So at any given point, the only way for you to determine what's the chain is listening to the previous votes, not the votes from like an hour ago or something, but just the previous votes. And so this is very nice in the sense that the protocol becomes super simple. You just really like take these votes and that tells you all you need to know, like really the most recent votes. And it basically prevents like a certain kind of adversarial attacks that are basically where a lot of the problems of LMD Ghost come from, these kind of attacks. So you can like prove really nice security properties for this kind of protocol. And yeah, I mean, here you see basically everything would be determined by these votes at this slot. And yeah, so these then would be like expired, and now you only care about these votes here, and so on. And so this is nice. You can make a protocol with this property that has really nice properties again. The issue it has is essentially this: you can be in like a very good situation. The chain looks great. Everything is, there's one long chain without any forks. All the votes are here. Everyone agrees. Now comes one moment of asynchrony. So by asynchrony, I mean some kind of network turbulence. Like basically for one slot, no one knows what's going on. These votes are supposed to be like good votes that just get lost. Like no one makes them, or no one receives them, and so on. And all of a sudden, some malicious actor in the network makes basically a fork, and then adds like a tiny bit of votes to it, like maybe it's one vote or something. And so again, because we have this memorylessness, what ends up happening is this kind of catastrophic outcome, which is that everyone forgets about where we were before, and they just listen to these votes, and then everyone ends up here, and all of a sudden we just forked like a whole, it could be like an hour, it could be however long, basically. So it's like a really bad kind of failure mode. And like this was like kind of unacceptable, and so any protocol that would have a problem like this, like we would never use it, basically. And so for a while, this was the story that we just like didn't really like. There were either protocols like this which had this problem, or there were ways to fix this problem, which essentially looked like not having committees, because having committees had all kinds of other issues that you wouldn't like, essentially, without this kind of memorylessness. And yeah, basically, it turns out that there is like a not so hard way to fix this issue. And what this gives us is essentially what I mentioned before, which is we can have, in principle, independently optimize finality and block production time. So we can have fast finality and we can have faster blocks at the same time. And we also don't need to have this like dependency on waiting for validator consolidation. So basically, we could, in principle, as soon as everything is ready, deploy something like this, and then as validator consolidation happens, finality will get faster for users. I mean, it can also be faster with like doing something like this immediately gives you like a bit of an advantage. Like you can improve it immediately, but then the point is that once you've done this, the more consolidation you get, the more finality just naturally gets faster for users, essentially. But there's no like there's not like a hard cutoff where like only now we can do it. Like we have to wait for 100,000 validators or something. Like today, again, it's 1 million. We don't know when we're gonna get to whichever number. And yeah, the kind of at a high level, like what this looks like how do what is the fix, is essentially really not that different from the general ideas of how these like decoupled protocols work. Is essentially that you take these kind of voting rounds where the whole validator set is voting, and again, this is meant to be for finalizing, which in a way you could think of it as, well, finalizing will definitely fix the problem, because once you finalize, there's no reorgs anymore. Like you can't have this like catastrophic kind of reorg the whole chain or something. And the issue is just that we might not be finalizing. We might be in a situation where we're not. But it basically turns out that you could just use these votes, even if you're not finalizing, to kind of stabilize the chain. So to kind of prevent these like catastrophic cases. And it basically looks like this. You would have a 3-level fork choice where first you start from the latest justified. This is something that is basically produced from the finality gadget. Is like a kind of it's not quite finalized, but it's something that looks like it's going to be finalized potentially. And so it's where you start your fork choice. Like it's where you start, even like nothing before that you even consider as potentially part of the canonical chain. Then there's these like purple blocks, which are basically what's been added here. It's you use the same votes they use to finalize, but you use it even if you're not finalizing, to determine kind of like a stable prefix, like something that you basically say, where you basically say this shouldn't be touched. Like I should not reorg this, even if this kind of underlying protocol is telling me that I should be reorging it, because there might be this network asynchrony or other situations that have caused this. And then only then you go to this like faster moving kind of blue suffix. So you basically go through all of these like more stable steps before you get to the blue like unstable part. And this essentially makes it so that the unstable part has like a low degree of instability. Like it can cause crazy things to happen, essentially. And yeah, as one last, so that's basically the main idea. I'm not gonna go into too many details because there's limited time. But one small kind of bonus thing is that another kind of development of the last maybe year and a half, which is partially like another reason why we've like thought that it makes sense to generally review the plans for how to do fast finality, is that there's been this emergence of what people call one-round finality protocols, or at least actually they call them, but anyway, I call them one-round finality protocols, which are basically protocols where you only need one of these like green things in order to finalize. Like you only need all the nodes to do like basically one vote, like one voting round in order to finalize something. And like there's some trade-offs and whatever we can you can discuss the exact like what exactly are you giving up by doing this, but they're pretty nice protocols. They have really like good properties. The trade-offs are actually not very bad, and getting one round finality is like pretty big deal. So ideally we would like to use something like this for the finality gadget. And so actually what the whole thing could look like is really just that you have a slot, you have like this like very small, again, orange committee that's voting, and this could be like a very small committee, it could be very fast, and then you only need a single one of these like green bubbles, like of this like whole validator set voting in order to finalize. So basically the whole pipeline could just look like essentially have a slot, have a little bit of like extra time for this like small voting round, then have the whole validator set do its thing, and you're done. And like now users know that the transaction has been finalized. Now yeah, as to like when any of these things will actually hit mainnet, I think this is more speculative than when last time I was here talking about PeerDAS. I think that was a much, to some extent, more much closer to the development pipeline. But still, like I think it's pretty clear that there's a huge interest on both of these things, like both on improving finality and on improving basically block time, like just basically like block production time. So yeah, I think both of these things will see a lot of interest, and I think a lot of these ideas will hopefully play a role in actually getting this to mainnet faster. Thank you.
Anyone have questions? Yeah, right here.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Very interesting. And I mean, it's also very interesting to see how this is exactly put on the roadmap. If you can say to this, or if you publish it soon.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of communication, there's probably going to be a blog post on like E3 or something that talks about these things soon-ish. As to like what this could look like in practice on the roadmap, I think that's harder to say. I think one thing that we're basically interested right now in looking in is if something like this can, to some extent, be done iteratively. I think like we know that it's always harder to try to do these like grand plans of like in 3 years we're going to do this big upgrade or something. Like ideally it would be nice to not try to chase something like this, but actually try to say, okay, let's maybe first do the finality gadget part or the decoupling part or something like that. I mean, and the two main candidates are kind of these, which is like one could be to first try to do the decoupling, so to try to basically move away from having like today 30,000 validators vote in every slot. We could try to already go down to this like small committee, basically do this kind of part here, and that could also potentially help with shorter slots. So we could try to do that and decouple from finality. Or another thing that we could try to do as an intermediate step is the finality gadget part. So for example, we could try to move to like a one-run finality kind of gadget before even doing this like broader decoupling thing. I think it's not very clear at the moment, and it also has like a lot of interplay with shorter slots as like a general, like people have like really a lot of interest in making slots to some extent shorter fast, like in the next year, in the next fork, or something along those lines. So I think that's the part that for sure will happen before, but it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it interacts with these things a lot, but it will not necessarily come with like big redesigns. It might just be like a, just optimize stuff and just try to squish the slot, which we definitely can. So yeah, I don't know, I hope that answered it.
Yeah. And I have another question that goes in the direction that you mentioned. Do you know what are the interactions of this proposal compared to the lean?
Yeah. In what sense? Okay, yeah, that part. Yeah, I think so. Right, let me start from some of the interactions. So there's some interactions in like I think for me, and I think even if you ask them, like Lean and people primarily working on Lean, a big thing in the whole idea of what Lean is supposed to do is this post-quantum transition. So that part definitely interacts a lot with anything to do with finality, and the reason for that is essentially that um, there's this whole part around aggregating signatures, like doing voting rounds in a reasonable time and so on. And post-quantum signatures are very large. So that's one kind of minus there, that like it makes things harder. It makes it more important to have a smaller validator set. On the other hand, there is like a subtlety that if you're doing signature aggregation in this like brute force proof, like recursive proof approach, which is kind of what they would want to do in with post-quantum signatures. Yes, the initial signatures are large, but actually the aggregation part is a bit better than what we have today with BLS signatures, because basically with BLS signatures you cannot aggregate things that overlap. Like you can only aggregate things that are like nice disjoint unions. So in a way, it gives you like a bit more power to design the aggregation part in like a more flexible way. So this interaction there, it's a bit unclear. Like it might even there's like one part of it that's bad and one part of it that's good. But yeah, I think bottom line is it might be that if we want to design for the post-quantum kind of transition earlier, then we might need to like plan for a smaller validator set like independently. As far as like the iterative versus big four kind of side of things, I think yeah, I mean I think there's different opinions, but I would say that generally the mindset is more on delivering things iteratively and trying to do one time big upgrades only when there's like a clear reason to do so, like when it's like okay, like this would be genuinely just not in any way like good to split up. So at least I don't know, that's my take, and I think it's fairly shared.
I think Chris over there.
So we try to intuitively understand comparing the time it takes for initial confirmation, it's like the red arrow, and then the full finality. Mm-hmm. Is that like the relationship the same, which is the committee size versus like the 2/3 of the whole validator set?
I think not really, because I think probably in the red part, what really dominates is just the latency of doing like whatever amount of hops is needed in the network, versus like it's not like about just like bandwidth, like how much like actual like attestation data is going through. Like if the committee is small enough, the bandwidth will basically just be irrelevant. It's just going to be like there's a few hops to go through in the network, and that just has some like fixed cost basically in terms of latency. Whereas like at some point, the bandwidth cost becomes like pretty meaningful. Like even today with the 30,000 kind of committee, it's not nothing. Like it does make to some extent a difference. Yeah, so I think it's not quite like linear, I guess. Like the red one will have some like fixed cost that's kind of the same as the large one, and only this maybe like bandwidth part will scale more like proportionally. But like still, I mean, I think basically there's no reason that if well designed, like this red arrow should be more than like 1 second, 2 seconds at most, like even without trying to go full data center or anything. Like there's not that many hops to go through in the network, and like even the farthest nodes are only, I don't know, like 100 milliseconds away or a bit more. It's not like
and if you try to understand the just one slot confirmation, how much certainty it gives that it won't fork?
Yeah, so we've like kind of looked into this as part of, there is this like somewhat parallel thing going on now of people working on what's called the fast confirmation rule. That's actually on top of the current protocol. It's not trying to like invent anything new. It's just trying to use the existing thing to like extract a guarantee out of it. And basically like at least looking on trying to see like on historical blocks, or like if you run it on current blocks or whatever, like how well does it do? It never seems to return to like tell you that something is confirmed if it doesn't end up being confirmed. And more or less, I mean, this has to do with like the assumptions are essentially two. Like one is network synchrony, and the other, because again, this is not finality, it's not economic finality. It doesn't. It's not in particular. It's not like an asynchronous kind of guarantee. Like if the network blows up, this might not be like a hard guarantee. But so yeah, one of the assumptions is synchrony, and the other one is like how many malicious voters are there. So the network is pretty synchronous in reality. Like most of the time, it's quite synchronous, especially if you make like mild synchronous assumptions of like seconds, not of like 100 milliseconds or something. And the other one is like there's not really nodes going around the network trying to like game this, or like at least even if there were, there's not like 20% of nodes or 30% of nodes or something like that. So yeah, I think you can get pretty good guarantees for like the if you're sending to someone 50 millions, like you probably want to wait for finality, I would say. But like if you're doing like a minor transaction or even like exchange deposit that's not like insanely large or something, I think there's not really much of a reason that you cannot get good enough guarantees from this like synchronous kind of confirmation.
And if you would shorten the slot, would it become 50% certainty?
50%. Sorry, what would you mean?
It would be 6-second slots instead of 12-second slots. Does that mean, like after one slot, the risk doubles that it might still not be fine?
You're saying if we shorten the slots, it becomes riskier, this rule? Yeah, I mean, I guess, again, one of the assumptions is network synchrony. And of course, the strength of the assumption depends on what is the latency parameter that you're assuming synchrony with respect to. So like if you compress things more and more and more, at some point, this latency parameter becomes more risky. So that is true. I think...
It answered my question.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe one or two small questions. How does this fit in the mempool? Essentially, everything before finality would be in the mempool, or at which part is it in the mempool?
This is like, I guess, even... Maybe it's in a way, it's like the mempool is the missing part of the story in the sense that it's like, so there's the blue blocks and the finalized block, whatever, and then there's even before the blue blocks there's the mempool. But like once something is in a blue block, it's out of the mempool already. Like if it's in a block that's kind of people consider canonical, then they will not keep it in their mempool anymore.
Gotcha. And just maybe a stupid question, I kind of forgot. Are there slots and epochs again?
So slots are like every 12 seconds, and it's when like a basically beacon block with an execution payload inside of it is produced, which essentially is like when let's say when an Ethereum block is produced, like to make it simple.
Slot and block, you would always, it's like, what's the difference between the slot and the block?
It's basically just that slots can be empty, like it might be that someone misses a block, but yeah, essentially for the purpose of this, you can basically think they're the same thing. Like every slot you expect there to be a block.
Gotcha. Like slot for a block.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry? Oh yeah, and epoch is, let's quickly, okay, so I'm gonna be quick, but okay, let's go to the picture. I think it's useful anyway. Here. Yeah, so basically like you just have 32 of these slots like in a row. That's what's just called an epoch. And in an epoch, like the definition of an epoch is essentially that everyone will have voted by the end of the epoch. Like because basically this like little, for our actual protocol, not so little, but yeah. So this is kind of meant to be for actual protocol. This would be like 1/32 of the validator set. So it's like about 30,000 validators will vote in every slot. By the end of the epoch, all of the about 1 million validators will have voted.
Gotcha. And then it's like consensus.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of need 2 epochs to finalize, but in 1 epoch, you can already do this justification thing. And that's like, it's not quite as strong, but it's something. It does like the first round of a finality protocol, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.